right, I'd like to welcome all of you to this new sessions of the Supply Chain Optimization Asia Summit. My name again is Max Henry. I'm your host for this summit today. It's great to have you on board. We have a number of people already signed up today, so I would like to right away introduce you to our next speaker. Wolfgang Lehmacher, who is a supply chain and technology strategist. Just to give some background about Wolfgang, he's been working in the supply chain space for quite a number of years. He's currently a board member, advisor, and business angel, advising a number of companies and startups in the region. And he was previously the director, head of supply chain and transport industry for the World Economic Forum. So without further ado, I'd like to let Wolfgang maybe do an introduction of himself. That would probably be better, and then start your presentation. Go ahead, Wolfgang. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Max. Thanks for the introduction. Thanks for inviting me to share my thoughts. Indeed, I have been working in the supply chain and transport space for some decades. You mentioned a few of the positions, including the World Economic Forum, and I'm still a member of the World Economic Forum Global Expert Group. I also spent time in consulting in big corporates like French La Poste. I was running Geopost Intercontinental, the global expansion vehicle, over 11 years. Worked for TNT, for Kuehne + Nagel, and did in the last years a lot of work in the technology space, looking not only into transport and logistics, but broader into retail and manufacturing, and most importantly into the dimension which holds everything together. When I was invited by you, Max, I thought, what can I talk about? And at that time, there was a lot of concern, and there still is, about the new coronavirus outbreak. And I thought it would be good to think about what is the good side of this, if there is any. And today I heard in sessions and from my peers that many see this as an opportunity. So my title is not as revolutionary as I thought. Nevertheless, I believe that this is a moment where we need hope, where we need positive energy, where we need solidarity. And I indeed think that we have the possibility to change gears in several ways. And so I'm having put together a presentation which talks about the situation, what companies are doing, and what we may be making out of this all. It is a human tragedy, and we should never forget that. It's very hard for a lot of people from a health perspective, clearly. It's hard for individuals, hard for families, but also from a psychological perspective. And this comes before, from my perspective, the business perspective. When I look at the COVID-19 discussion, there is a lot of talk about China, about a China-centric world, and this in the context of globalization. And indeed, we have built a world which is, from a supply chain perspective, in certain verticals, very much centered around China. But I don't believe that the China perspective will not change just due to COVID-19. And this for several reasons. And one is that COVID-19 is a global crisis. It affects everybody. So it's not about China. wherever you have production, you are affected. And that pushes me away from China to a discussion about globalization. And here the point is that we read the same headlines this time as we were reading when we had the global financial crisis, when we had SARS. And during every crisis, you read, this is the end of globalization. I personally believe that globalization is an evolutionary process which goes on for hundreds, if not thousands of years. It is driven by the willingness of people to vote by their feet and move where they want to go and do business and discover new opportunities. And I believe that if we consider this, then it becomes very clear that globalization will never stop. We will always try to find new frontiers and explore new territory. There is a discussion around trade is going down, being less important. And this is not since yesterday. This is a process that lasts over the last 15 to 20 years. Over this period of time, goods producing value chains have become less trade intensive. Between 2007 and 2017, exports declined from 28.1 to 22.5 of gross output. So there is a natural tendency towards more local production. And this because countries become more sophisticated. They accumulate more capabilities and are able to produce more for themselves. So less need to import, and in fact for others, less opportunity to export. Then there is that big topic of the fourth industrial revolution, of digitization. And of course, in trade, we see the same trends as we see in other parts of the economy. We see in trade that cross-border services are growing faster. In fact, more than 60% faster than trade in goods. Currently, national statistics attribute 23% of all trade to services. 23%, 1/4 almost. But if we add to this the intercompany digital trade, the digital services added to physical exports, plus the cross-border services, the free cross-border services offered to consumers worldwide, we reach a number slightly above 50%. That means globalization has gone digital. Is more digital than physical. Then there is that strong belief it's all about labor cost. But that's not true anymore. It's less than 20% of goods trade that is based on labor cost arbitrage. And this factor, this percentage, this part is constantly declining. And what it is about today, it's about high-end investments. It's about intangible assets. It's about brands. It's about knowledge. So it has changed. The world now becomes also from an intelligence, knowledge, brand perspective, much more balanced. And then comes a factor which is debated all the time, which is globalization versus regionalization. And I have said already years ago that regionalization is the new globalization, because due to better technology and therefore more distributed manufacturing, due to rising incomes and therefore more geographic equality, regional ecosystem, regional economies self-sufficient economies emerged. But nevertheless, there is the factor of raw material, there's the factor of competition, and there will always be trade between these regional platforms, between these regional ecosystems. But today, China is trading more with Asia than with the US. US is trading more with Mexico and more with Canada than with China. So the world has already significantly changed, and COVID-19 might accelerate it in some areas, but there are much more factors at play. But with all this change, I believe there are massive opportunities in the area of digital trade. And all the stakeholders in the supply chain need to become more savvy, more sophisticated. And those who are leading this development will also find a lot of new business opportunities. Coming back to COVID-19. What is COVID-19 and how has it evolved? It is something unique. It is a simultaneous supply and demand drop. It's almost simultaneous, or it's simultaneous where the COVID-19 outbreak occurs, which means we were not, in fact, at the beginning that concerned about the supply from China. The first warnings were about shortfalls in revenue. Starbucks in January 2020 warned that the results would be hit because the company was forced to close more than 50% of its cafes in the country. And then, of course, came the warnings, came the information about potential uncertainties in the supply chain from the likes Apple and Microsoft. Microsoft installs programs in China on computers. But it started with a demand shock, and then came the supply concern. And how does it all play out, and what are the thoughts? And this is a slide which I wrote during the invitation time. And at that time, people were talking about an impact of maybe a percentage point, half a percentage point of global growth. And now the estimates are going into the 1 trillion and more US dollar impact. Many fear recession. We will see, and it is not clear, and it depends on several factors, which I will come into later. What is important as well when we think about the times after COVID-19 is how are we going to reboot the machine, and which countries will be faster in terms of recovery and which countries will be slower. And there will be differences. And I believe that the larger countries, more diversified, with larger domestic economies, will bounce back faster than smaller, less diversified economies. And then there is a difference from industry to industry, and each industry knows where they stand, from aviation and travel, which are very severely hit, to e-commerce, where very new opportunities emerged. But overall, I think that this is a moment of big learning, of a moment of reflection, thinking, what is happening in my supply chain? What happens in different geographies, in different verticals? It's the moment where we can build intelligence. And for those who provide intelligence to the supply chain stakeholders, for those, there is also a big opportunity. What did we see first in terms of disruption, delays out of China. We saw suddenly factories that were closing or not in China, not opening because they had a lack of workers, because they were in a zone of lockdown, or because there was a lack of transportation because the drivers simply didn't show up because they feared infection, or the country had just stopped the railways. So these were initial effects. But then there were the massive flight cancellations. So hundreds, if not thousands of flights were canceled, which took significant capacity out of the air cargo market. And that led to bottlenecks and price hikes. And today we can see prices of $185,000 for a 40-feet container equivalent with gloves and mask from Hong Kong to Europe. This is also driven by a lot of blank sailings. The shipping lines reacted and cut down the capacity. Now we see that those people who need the goods in the West want to go air. And we see here, I think, less an opportunity, but a lot of learning. We see how good are we in responding to all this. And for me, the COVID-19 crisis is a moment of collaboration, because we need to know what our partners in the supply chain are doing to be able to make the decisions and ensure that we can still deliver what we committed to. So what are the factors which will determine how long this will take? And I think there is a moment now of surrender. So people have understood COVID-19 doesn't go away. I can't avoid it. There are still some governments who have different views, but most of the people on the planet, and 50% of the world population is in lockdown, have accepted that this is a severe threat and cannot be avoided. But we also think, most probably think, that this is a one-wave event, and once we are through this, then everything will be fine. And that would be the first scenario, which is the COVID-19 is not seasonal. There is not a second wave. It will disappear, and which allows the Asian economy, which comes out of the tunnel first, to rebound in a period of, let's say, 3 to 6 months. I don't want to say that we will go back to normal, because that is a separate debate. But what also could happen is that the virus persists, and then we are facing a much longer road of disruption and struggle in the economy. And that brings us to the opportunity. I think the opportunity lies here in the decision and harvesting what we have done yesterday. Those companies that have extensively mapped their supply chains, that know exactly their partners, tier 1, tier 2, 3, and N, that know not only who they are, but what they can do, where they are, how their financial situation is, etc. They are better off. Those who have, to a large extent, digitized their supply chain, who get information about the state of the supply chain, will be much better off. than those who haven't. What do companies do? And we had a panel discussion at the event today, a bit earlier, and we spoke about the pressure companies are on now, and what they do first is to launch their emergency, their crisis procedures. They create crisis teams and they review their contingency plans and they execute on what makes sense. These teams also consult regulatory guidelines and set the priorities. And of course, the first priority is workforce protection. And it means that we have to modify some of the policies. Who had thought that we would not be able to fly anymore? So suddenly we have a very contagious virus and we are all in our office. Is that what we should do? No, we need to protect our employees. So we have to work either in shifts or send people home and let them work from home. And who had thought that so many people could work from home? And I say it again and again. What would have been possible without the internet, without smartphones, without PC? Without them, we would be in a much more difficult situation. Sometimes I'm also a little bit a digitization skeptic, but here digitization helps really. Then comes the supplier base. And it is very important that the manufacturers look after their suppliers because the suppliers depend on their customers. And I mentioned it today, dependent on the relationship, different measures can be taken, from ordering maybe everything we need over the next 2 years to give them the possibility to get financing from their banks and keep them active, to longer credit lines, to loans, and even taking stakes in companies. But the work with the supplier base is highly important. The manufacturers, they are only as strong as their suppliers. Of course, if you have, and some have, 10,000, 15,000, 20,000 suppliers, you have to prioritize. And what we also need to face is that, especially in the small and mid-sized segment, a lot of companies will not make it through this crisis. Then there is the collaboration with the customer. I believe this is also a big opportunity to build better relationships with your customers, to come together to understand what are the needs on the customer side, especially in the B2B business. What are the expectations? Explain the situation you are in. And this will lead to a new relationship. And also an important role have to play or lies with the logistics companies, because they have to find the solutions with all the blank sailings, with the reduced air capacity, with irrational behavior of governments, sudden strict controls at the Polish border, froze traffic, and more importantly, it froze the supply of food, medical equipment, and other important things that is needed by citizens in lockdown. So the logistics companies have to find their way to make sure that the supply to the population is secured and customers will be satisfied even during that crisis. And then there is the financial situation, financial stress testing, and actions, credit screening, solvency checks, forecasting, etc., has to be done and is to be done at the beginning and during the entire crisis. The opportunity lies here in the collaboration, in a more intensified collaboration, and new and stronger relationships. We have also a much bigger opportunity in front of us. Many of us are in a lockdown situation, and I can still have, as many, also a walk here and then. And what strikes me is the blue sky, is the silence on the roads. You can find beauty in this crisis. And this brings to my mind the question, why are we rushing all the time? Why do we need all these traffic jams? And I think that we have the opportunity now, with the successful experiment of working from home, for example, to establish a world with a better quality. And we need this because global warming is caused by mobility in the way we are practicing it, and global warming results in not only in national disasters, but also in a higher probability of pandemics. We drive deforestation with industrialization. That drives animals closer to human life. And that makes the zoonotic viruses, the zoonotic virus cross-species leap more possible. We have clear indicators that we are living at the brink of the possibilities of our planet. And I sincerely hope that this crisis also pushes us not only towards more digitization, but also towards a more circular economy. And here the opportunity is to build a safer and healthier world. There is a lot of discussion about flattening the curve. And I believe that the circular economy helps to flatten the sustainability curve, not only the COVID-19 curve. And what is it, the circular economy? The circular economy is an economy ideally without waste and without emissions. And the important factors here are first, the design. We need to design our product differently. We need to manufacture differently. We need to transport differently. And we need capital to finance that transition. And that is an opportunity for all players in the supply chain and for the capital market. And we see tailwind now and more discussions about impact investing. And if we go down that road, we also flatten the CO2 and the waste curve. Thank you very much, and I'm happy to take your questions.
All right, well, thank you very much, Wolfgang. So we have some questions already, and let me take them. First question is being asked on the Q&A tab. For people whose jobs are being impacted, how they should prepare to bounce back in this situation?
This is a difficult question. A lot of jobs are impacted. It depends on the circumstances. I think it is a good moment now for those who are out of work or have less work to run online courses and build new skills to increase their opportunities. That is something which comes to my mind. And as I said, there will be a lot of new fields to work in. And I see a lot of opportunities, not only in e-commerce, but also in the technology space. Everything which allows to manage remotely, and this is everything in digitization, communication network equipment, automation, everything what allows to keep us going is a promising field. And if you can build some capabilities to be part of that industry, that is one way of preparing yourself.
Okay, I've got another question for you. I like your thoughts about maybe we should now go back to where we were, and then just use this opportunity, use this crisis to reinvent and change the way that we work and operate. But companies again are very, especially the large companies, are very traditional in the way they operate. They still want to have offices. They want their workers to go to the office. They want to have factories. They want to be able to source in China. So there are still a lot of, I would say, traditional mindset going on in this business world. So do you really think that's going to wake up, the executive on doing things differently?
You're making a very good point, Max. And I don't dream and see that believe that 1st of July we reboot a different economy. This is illusion and impossible. But I could imagine something which we have seen with the digital world emerging. And we saw it slowly at the beginning with the third industrial revolution. And a lot of people laughed at entrepreneurs like Jeff Bezos. And a lot tried and failed. And that was considered the proof that that would not work. And now, 20 years later, we have a digital economy. The circular economy has started also some years ago. There are startups in this field. There are also larger companies already in that field. There is a lot of thinking. So 10, 20 years down the road, I can see a very different world. So it is not that I expect, to answer concretely your question, that those who are in the linear world will suddenly think circular. It is that the circular world will get tailwind. The first tailwind, the strongest tailwind will be in the digital industry. So everything automation, digitization, as I said, but there will be also the beginning of a stronger development in the circular economy.
Okay, thank you, Wolfgang. Okay, I think we're going to have time just to take one more question. I apologize for those. There are other questions, but we have another speaker joining us after this session. We went already beyond the hour. I would like to take the question from Michael. In the past few years, a lot of our customers have been implementing a centralized network to support regional business. With this crisis, is it a need to reconsider a decentralized network for the future through it might occur more cost?
It depends. First, it depends on the sector, it depends on the country. So a few thoughts come to my mind. If you are in the medical equipment space and everything, hospital supply, etc., I see that hospitals start building stocks. But I don't see, for example, that we are now decentralize ventilator manufacturing units and leave them running at 20% capacity. We will think about much smarter things that we can react much faster. What I'm also saying often when I face that question, It's not about moving a factory. It's about moving an ecosystem. It is not one production site. It's the whole base of suppliers. It's the whole infrastructure. It's sometimes the academic ecosystem. It is the workforce. So yes, people will consider to diversify risks, and we will clearly see this, but it's not that easy, and the advantages of aggregated production, they are obvious. What will also play into this direction is distributed manufacturing, 3D printing, because with 3D printing, robotics, artificial intelligence, etc., we are able to have a more distributed network at same quality. But at the same time, we shouldn't forget, with all the talks about robots replacing humans, there are still 345 million people working in the factory. That's a massive workforce. And if you move ecosystems out of China, you have to move it where the workforce is. And I can tell you, in Europe or Germany, you don't find workforce. In Japan, you don't find a lot of workforce. And in the US, you have not a lot of unemployed people neither. What this crisis does, though, is that for some nations, it might make sense at that point, when they're facing high employment because of COVID-19, to use that moment to build a new ecosystem. But it is a costly exercise.
Okay. Thank you very much, Wolfgang. Again, I want to apologize to the other questions that we don't have time to take them because, again, we have another session starting now. But I just put the link to our group on chain.net, and I would like to invite you guys to continue asking questions on that group, and Wolfgang will then go back and try to answer them in the group as well. Again, so thank you very much, Wolfgang, for sharing your insights. That was very interesting. And thank you for all of you guys for attending the session today. We have already another speaker speaking, so check it out. All right, I'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thank you.